Hey friends, this is Mike. Welcome back to the Soul Unleashed podcast. Today we're going to continue our discussion about the apparitions of Mary, the Mother of God, or the Mother of Jesus, or however you might choose to describe her. We're going to talk about Our Lady of Fatima, as it's called, which took place in 1917. But as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, I find these apparitions fascinating, and I want to view them through the lens of someone undergoing a spiritual awakening and not necessarily as a Catholic. Here we go. Hello again, friends and fellow truth seekers. Mike Nicholas here with another episode of the Soul Unleashed podcast, where my goal is to help you with the questions you might have regarding the awakening of your soul, and particularly to help other left brain types, like I think I am, ask the right questions in our search for deeper meaning to life. Ultimately, I want to help you unleash your soul from limiting beliefs and smothering paradigms. So let's get started with today's adventure. This is about Our Lady of Fatima, and in our previous episodes, we explored 3 earlier apparitions of a spirit or a soul that appeared as a woman, closely resembling the biblical figure of Mary, Mother of God, and each time she chose to identify herself with a different title. So we started with the apparition near Mexico City in 1531, known as Our Lady of Guadalupe, and then we went to Paris, France in 1830, and discussed the appearance that was now called the Miraculous Medal Appearance. And our last episode covered the story of a young girl named Bernadette and the apparitions that happened in Lourdes, France in 1858. So I'm continuing this in date order. And today we turn our attention to an apparition that basically stands out for its specific and troubling messages. This is the story of Our Lady of Fatima. And over 6 months, on the 13th of each month, the apparitions occurred in the small village of Fatima, Portugal. Now, these events took place during a time of great turmoil, both globally with World War I going on, and also locally with what was growing anti-religious sentiment in Portugal. As in our previous episodes, I want to start by outlining the facts of the apparition, followed by a discussion as what the messages were, and then relate those to the political climate that was going on at the time. And then I'll close it with some analytical thoughts, my left brain thoughts on the apparition. Now, after this podcast, next week we'll talk about the one more apparition. It took place in Medjugorje in what's now called the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It used to be called Yugoslavia. And then I want to compare and contrast the messages of all these apparitions and kind of put them in the light of the spiritual awakening that I'm going through. So let's talk about Fatima, and here are the facts of the story. Fatima is a rural area, and it was relatively unknown at this time, 1917, but it quickly became a focal point of global interest due to what I'm about to describe here as supernatural occurrences. In the other things we looked at, the other apparitions, there was basically one visionary, Juan, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Catherine Labouré for Miraculous Medal, Bernadette Soubirous for Our Lady of Lourdes. But in this one, there are 3 visionaries, and they're all young shepherd children. One was brother and sister, and one was a cousin. The cousin, her name was Lucia. She was the oldest. She was 10. And then the brother and sister were Francisco, who was 9, and Jacinta, who was 7. So they're very small children, and they came from very humble backgrounds, and they were tending their family's sheep when they first experienced the apparition. So, again, there were 6 of them. The first apparition took place on May 13th of 1917. While tending their sheep, the children saw a brilliant light and then a lady, which they described as being brighter than the sun, standing above a small oak tree. So she was elevated up in the air. The lady, which they later identified as the Virgin Mary, asked them to return to that same spot on the 13th of each month for the following 6 months. She emphasized the importance of praying the rosary every day to bring peace to the world and an end to the war. So that was the first apparition. Second one was a month later, June 13th. She revealed during that apparition that Francisco and Jacinta would be taken to heaven soon, but Lucia would remain longer to spread devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and she again stressed the importance of the rosary. Just as a side note, Francisco and Jacinta did pass away in 1919 and 1920, but Lucia lived until 2005. And I'll talk about that in terms of their canonization as saints. But that's how quickly Francisco and Jacinta did die. Third apparition, which is one of the most important ones, is where the lady revealed what are now called the 3 secrets of Fatima. Now, I have to tell you that, as a side note, back in the day, 90s, I worked with a Catholic organization, and the 3 secrets of Fatima were a huge deal. I mean, I guess they're still a huge deal, but back then, only 2 of them had been revealed. The third secret, which I'm about to describe here, the third secret was not revealed until the year 2000. So everybody was terrified about what the third secret of Fatima might be. You know, nuclear war. People thought it had something to do with Y2K. For those of you that remember Y2K, that was when 1999 flipped over to the year 2000, and everybody, many people, were convinced that the computers of the world couldn't handle it, and that our world's computer backbone was going to fail, and there'd be upheavals and uprisings and war, and satellites would crash, everything. So no one knew what the third secret of Fatima was. But anyway, here's the 2 secrets that were revealed. The first was a vision of hell. And Lucia described it in her memoirs, which she wrote later. The children basically saw a great sea of fire in which were immersed demons and souls in human form, like transparent burning embers, all blackened and burnished bronze, floating about in the conflagration and raised into the air by the flames, and great clouds of smoke, falling and flailing about, shrieks and groans of pain and despair. All this, of course, horrified the children and made them tremble with fear. So the Virgin Mary explained that God wished to show this vision to them, to instill in them a sense of compassion and a call to prayer and sacrifice for the conversion of sinners to avoid this specific punishment. The second secret was had to do with predictions. And so it was much related to World War I and World War II. Virgin Mary predicted that World War I would end, but if people did not cease offending God, that there would be a worse war during the reign of Pope Pius XI, which did occur. That was a reference to World War II. She called for the conversion of Russia to her Immaculate Heart, which did not happen, basically saying that if that did not happen, communism would continue to flourish and impact the world with World War II. And that's what happened. So those are the first 2 secrets of Fatima. And the third secret is called the Vision of the Bishop in White. And this was kept confidential by the Church, as I mentioned, until the year 2000, when it was publicly revealed by Pope John Paul II. It's a symbolic vision. It's been interpreted in various ways. But Lucia described it as seeing an angel with a flaming sword in his left hand, flashing and emitting flames that seemed to set the world on fire. However, the flames were extinguished by radiance emitting from the right hand of Mary. The children also saw a bishop dressed in white, whom they interpreted to be the Pope, walking with difficulty towards a large cross amid the ruins of a city that was half in ruins. The Pope passed through the city and fell on his knees in front of the large cross, where he was killed by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at him. So there were also priests and nuns and men and women with him, and they all died too. So the Vatican has interpreted this vision as referring to the suffering of the Church in the 20th century, particularly the persecution of Christians and the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II, which took place in 1981. But again, this secret was not revealed until 2000, and so there was a lot of fanfare about the secret being revealed, and that's what it is. It's been interpreted a lot of different ways. I'm not going to try and interpret it, but I can tell you there's a lot of things written out there about the third secret of Fatima. So those are the 3 secrets of Fatima revealed during the third apparition, July of 1917. The fourth apparition took place on August 19th of 1917. You'll notice that it didn't take place on August 13th. It was August 19th. The reason was the children were detained by local authorities on the 13th of August. They were prevented from going to see the Blessed Mother. The apparition did occur later after the children were released, and the lady continued to urge prayer and penance. The fifth apparition was a large crowd by this time had gathered September 13th, and the lady continued to call for prayer, emphasizing the need for the rosary. By this time, thousands and thousands of people were now paying attention to this, and as part of the fifth apparition, the children mentioned that there was going to be a miracle or a sign that the lady had promised that she would show during the last apparition to convince the people that these were valid apparitions and that this was coming from God. October 13th of 1917 is called the Miracle of the Sun. And this miracle, this final apparition, was witnessed by a crowd estimated to be between 30,000 and 100,000 people. During this apparition, the lady identified herself as Our Lady of the Rosary. She urged the building of a chapel on that site. And then there was a miracle that everybody witnessed, the so-called Miracle of the Sun. I want to read something here to you because, nowadays if something like this was to happen, there'd be hundreds of thousands of people with cell phones and cameras, and they'd be recording all this, right? Well, back in 1917, of course, that duty was mainly part of the press. So because there were so many thousands of people at this event, it was widely publicized. There was going to be a miracle. The press was there. There was a gentleman named Avelino de Almeida, and he was a correspondent for a Lisbon newspaper called O Século. And they were not friendly to the Catholic Church. They were critical of the Catholic Church. Avelino de Almeida had a really good reputation. He was generally considered a fair person. Here's how he describes what happened. It's dated Fatima, 13 October 1917, by O Século's special correspondent. At midday, the rain stopped. The sky, heavy with clouds, threatened to plunge once more, but the sun broke through the dense layer of clouds. Moments later, the colossal star, never so radiant, appeared to dance, to jerk, to shudder. The multitude turns to the radiant sun, which suddenly lost all its dazzling clarity, and they saw a tinted disk in movement, in vertiginous rotation. A cry came from every mouth. People fell to their knees on the muddy ground. The miracle that the children had announced was about to happen. The seconds seemed like hours, so vivid were they in their thoughts. Suddenly, a gigantic sun burst from the clouds, spinning madly in the firmament, making incredible movements of the same kind, and outside all cosmic laws, the sun was dancing according to the typical expression of the people. The shuddering sun released multifaceted lights and colors. But the miracle, as the people had proclaimed, did not end there. The sun stopped moving for a few moments and then resumed its incredible dance, rotating upon itself, and again launched beams of light of all colors, red, purple, green, blue, reflections that enchanted the senses. This immense crowd was diverse. Pilgrims, believers, and skeptics were equally impressed by the supernatural event. Testimonies from all walks of life agree on the occurrences of this inexplicable phenomenon. End quote. So that's the account of this respected newspaperman of what happened during the Miracle of the Sun in October of 1917. Pretty incredible stuff. Nowadays, of course, to be well documented, but certainly surprising for, if you believe this, that this stuff actually happened. Let me just wrap up here with what happened to the children. Of the three children, only Lucia, only the women, the girls, Lucia and Jacinta, could see and hear the Blessed Mother. Francisco could not hear. He could see everything. So they had different perceptions, also due to their age. They had different explanations of what they were seeing. They were all interviewed. They were all exhaustively interviewed and investigated. They were met with critical responses by their families, by their neighbors, by their area there, the villagers, the church, the government certainly got involved, and they stuck to their story. As I mentioned, Jacinta and Francisco, they passed 1919, 1920, and they were granted immediate entry into heaven by the Catholic Church. I shouldn't say it that way. They were immediately made martyrs of the Catholic Church. The Church believes that they were immediately sent to heaven. and they were made saints. Lucia, because she lived until 2005, they're still gone through with making her a saint. She's not a saint yet. Let me cover real quick about the political time, about what was going on then, because there was a lot happening in Portugal that, if you understand this, makes this whole apparition thing even more interesting. The church at the time, there was a new Republican government that came into place in Portugal in 1911, and that new Republican government enacted a series of laws that was aimed at separating the church from the state. So this included things like abolishing all religious orders and confiscating their property, nationalizing all church assets, including schools, hospitals, and other institutions, and that became property of the state. They removed all religious symbols from public buildings and banned all religious instruction in public schools. They took over the civil registry. So that meant they took over things like recording births, marriages, deaths, that had all been traditionally managed by the church, and now the state, the Portuguese government, took it over. Many religious orders were expelled from the country, including the Jesuits. They really disliked the Jesuits, and their properties were seized. So that action really disrupted the whole social services and education system, that especially the poor people like Fatima, they were heavily reliant on the church for these kind of things. And so when education and social services were stripped away, they were really suffering. That's one reason why these apparitions at Fatima caused people to suddenly flock and return to the church, because Portugal also banned all religious education from public schools. Their point was they were trying to reduce the influence of the church over youth, and they were trying to promote a secular worldview. Also, the government had a very active and anti-clerical press that they were using to criticize the church and to portray the church as backward, as an obstacle to progress. So that propaganda was basically aimed at trying to turn public opinion against the Catholic Church and promote secular values. It worked pretty well, but now you can understand, based upon all that stuff, why the secular authorities were so opposed to what they saw fomenting in Fatima. And by the time that the one apparition came around where they were prevented from attending, it was because they were stopped. That was the fourth apparition in August of 1917. They were stopped from going there because the local authorities were trying to stop all this stuff they saw as a threat to their secularization of Portugal. The church, of course, saw it as an opportunity, so they pressed, once they investigated this, and they did so exhaustively, but once they investigated this, they really promulgated Fatima. So as you might expect, there's a lot of books written about Fatima. I'll put some of those in the show notes. Lucia wrote her own memoirs about the images and the visions, and I'll put those in the show notes so you know where to find those. I want to just read you, 4 excerpts that are kind of key excerpts of the messages that were given by the Blessed Mother during the apparitions. And these are quotes that are attributed to this vision or to this soul that Lucia saw. And they're very short. On May 13th of 1917, the first vision, she said, "Pray the rosary every day in order to obtain peace for the world and the end of the war," unquote. On June 13th, 1917, this is the second apparition, she said, "Jesus wishes to establish devotion to my Immaculate Heart in the world. I promise salvation to those who embrace it, and their souls will be loved by God as flowers placed by me to adorn his throne," unquote. July, the third apparition, July 13th, she said, "Sacrifice yourselves for sinners, and say many times, especially whenever you make some sacrifice, 'O Jesus, it is for the love of you, for the conversion of sinners, and in reparation for the sins committed against the Immaculate Heart of Mary," unquote. And then the last one, this is the sixth one, October 13th, 1917. This is when she actually identified herself. She said, "I am the Lady of the Rosary. Continue always to pray the Rosary every day. The war is going to end, and the soldiers will soon return to their homes," unquote. So those excerpts basically capture the essence of the messages that she gave, focusing on prayer, penance, and devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. those, in addition to the three secrets of Fatima, which are frightening, constitute what Fatima is all about. So anyway, what does all this mean? You might say, great, Mike, what do we care? What do we care? I'm doing this because, for me, I've learned a lot as I've been going through this. I've been going through the apparitions. Again, I'm only doing 5 of about 18. But, if I'm willing to believe things like, I know my son is on the other side, that he's passed, and I'm able to speak to him through mediums, and I believe that, and I believe in our souls being reincarnated and coming back to Earth, and I believe in soul journeys and soul contracts, and if I believe all that stuff, it's hard to ignore things like this, which are well documented, thoroughly investigated, and appear to be of supernatural origin. So if I'm ready to believe something like orbs when I see them in my home, or cardinals or a message from my father or my mother, then how can I ignore these apparitions? Now, I don't know if I can accept the messages of the apparitions. This is what I'll talk about towards the end of my podcasts, but after I finish the apparitions podcast, this whole vision of hell and souls burning and all that, that is something that I have a lot of trouble with. But I want to talk about, why the Blessed Mother, why she looks like she does, why just Catholics paying attention to this and not other religions, or do other religions have things like this that happen? Those are the kind of things I want to explore a little bit later. But that's why I'm going through these one at a time. This is Fatima, and Medjugorje will be next. Thanks for listening. By the way, if you want to comment on any of this, I welcome your comments, and I learn a lot from what people tell me. You can go to my website, mike@mikenicholas.com. The podcasts are all there, and you can comment right on the website, which is easy to do, or just email me, mike@mikenicholas.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon about Medjugorje. Bye-bye.